and the author of this report is Tony Reedy. And that item is on page 53. Welcome, Tony. Thanks for your authoring this report. We've read the report. I think it's reasonably straightforward. This has gone through, in part, other decision-making processes as well. And if you would like to give us a brief summary.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the plan change has 4 components. We're looking at rezoning some recently vested land, approximately 100 land parcels that have been acquired upon subdivision over the last year. It also corrects a small number of errors which we've spotted, either ourselves or the local community has spotted. There are 3 reserves, Taniwha, Maybury, Boundary, where some land swaps and rezoning are occurring in the Tamaki regeneration area. So we've worked closely with Tamaki Regeneration Company there on that, and Tamaki Local Board. And there's also a further 10 land parcels as part of Panuku Auckland's land disposal and rationalisation process. And these, as you've mentioned, have been through other council committees, the Finance and Performance Committee. They've been through council departments, through iwi and local boards as well. And this is sort of the end part of that process. That's really just a broad overview. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Tony. Members, I just want to take you to a proposed amendment which I've canvassed with some members. I have canvassed it with Councillor Hulse in particular, and it's an addition, and I'll read it to you. Now, I'm pretty sure we only have, we do have a screen. Thank you. And that is a part C, is request the staff to report back to the committee before the end of the year on issues and options associated with reclassifying and rezoning redundant pieces of road reserve and paper roads as recreation reserves and open space. The report should also assess whether pedestrian-only accessways should be zoned as open space. Members, you might recall that I raised this at a meeting, Councillor Hulse and I raised this, I think it was a month ago. We're very aware that there are a number of road ends and parcels which are on the asset register of Auckland Transport, but they don't perform a transport function. They actually perform an open space reserve function, and in most cases, the administration of those packages is by community services, that is parks, and the cost of that comes out of the parks budget. So they're actually functioning as open space and reserves, but they're not on our asset register as such. I think there's some risk in that, and so the proposal is we don't know the extent of that at this time, but let's explore that with the view looking out to even more substantially, formally increase our open space right across Auckland. Tony, can I ask you in the first instance to reflect on that motion, and do you have anything further to add? I support the motion. In fact, this morning I was looking at a number of examples around the region, and there's literally hundreds of these road ends which are perceived by the community as open space or reserves. They're green, but they lie within the road reserve, so there is a very widespread issue, and we can look into those and come back to you with give you an idea of the scale of how many and the different options we could look at addressing the zoning of them. But it is quite widespread. Thank you, Tony. Questions at this time from Councillor Bark. Actually, I will move the motions A, B and the C, and Councillor Hulse, thank you. And first question, Councillor Bark.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you. Thank you, Tony, for the report. My question is, why, in regards to the Tamaki regeneration proposed land exchanges and rezoning. Why are we progressing with these recommendations based on a draft open space network plan that hasn't been out for community consultation yet? And, you know, is that right that a developer gets to dictate the open space requirements of a community without the community being consulted, who have expectations of public consultation based on statements made by the local board? Thank you.
Thank you. In an ideal world, the open space network plan would be finalised. Unfortunately, it's not. The local board has consulted with the community at a broader level through its local board plan. It does signal that there will be changes, and through the regeneration in their area, there will be changes to the open space network. At a broad, admittedly, it's at a broad level. We've had a workshop with the local board as well, and a subsequent follow-up meeting where they agreed to these first three, but they want to see further consultation with the community on the subsequent land swaps and rezoning, where there are potentially some more controversial changes coming. I think these ones are reasonably straightforward in that there's no net loss or net gain of open space land. And in fact, they are improving in quality by opening them up to streets and that sort of urban design approach. But yeah, so in short, ideally the network plan would be finalised and would have been consulted on, that unfortunately hasn't occurred.
Councillor Barney?
Mr. Chair, is there a way to add an extra resolution, recommendation, that the public consultation does happen on the open space network plan before we make any decisions about these land exchanges and rezoning? I note it's also identified as a risk in this report that changes could be made. So common sense approach dictates, why don't you just do the public consultation first and then go from there with these land exchanges and rezoning?
Can I go back to you on that, John? I'm just, sorry, Tony, on on that question.
In terms of the plan change, we will be notifying affected landowners as part of the plan change. So there will be definitely a heads up on the proposed changes. I know that Parks and the local board have been in discussions over a number of months on how to consult with the community on such a detailed plan, and I don't think that's been resolved yet, but there will be, through the plan change process, public notification of those changes.
That's right, Mr. Chair, on those particular pieces of land parcel. So it's a very piecemeal approach, whereas the open space network plan would be overall on the whole open space and reserves in the Tamaki area. So it's a better coordinated way to do things than this piecemeal approach of these three reserves. And I note in the attachments there's more reserves, which nobody really knows anything about in the community. So I would like to see public notification happen before any land exchange and rezoning happens in Tamaki, starting with these three reserves. Thank you.
Okay, can I just check on the local board input on this particular item from the Tamaki Māoka Kia Kia?
Yes, so we had our workshop in May and those very same issues were raised. Parks were meant to get back to the local board in terms of progressing consultation on the network plan. They have done that, but it hasn't occurred today. And then subsequently had our local board meeting last month. I think it was last month, earlier this month. No, last month. And the board said they were comfortable with these three going ahead, but they wanted to see consultation on the wider open space network plan for the future land swaps and rezonings.
And so if I could add to that, Mr. Chair, I have information from the Maungakiki Tamaki Local Board where they've said that they will just submit like everybody else in the public notification. So they've almost given up hope about trying to get the open space network plan underway, the consultation underway, and I don't think that's good enough. I don't think it's good enough that as the local governors, they are just another tick in the box of public notification on each single piece of land, not an overall picture. It just seems like a very poor process to carry out, and one that has implications for other areas of Auckland where you have this kind of development and situation happening. It doesn't make sense to do it this way.
Okay. Okay, I'm just trying to, I haven't, it hasn't been signalled to me, so I'm just hearing this for the first time as chair, so I'm trying to understand this issue and the complexity. I'm hearing that the local board is okay, the local councillor has a concern, so can the local...
No, the local board is not okay. The local board is agreeing to go with this because they feel like they have no other choice. But they have signalled that they would prefer public notification. The delay has been with officers and the local board trying to work out how to do public consultation.
Thank you. Councillor Bartley, can you just frame up what the words might be, and we'll have a look at them in terms of an amendment.
Okay.
I need to understand what the implications are of the amendment. Do you want to just repeat orally just what the amendment sounds like from...
That public consultation be carried out on the proposed land exchanges. That public consultation be carried out on the draft Tamaki Open Space Network Plan before any land exchanges and rezoning of these Tamaki reserves are passed by this committee.
Thank you. Can we get those words formally here? Would you like to work with Kalinda? And we'll get those words up. Now I'll just ask Manager of Plans and Places John Dogood to reflect on that and maybe just explain to us, are there any implications there, benefits or disbenefits to that motion?
Thank you. Our understanding was that the local board did support the rezoning going through. I guess this is new information. We wouldn't have put this recommendation forward if the board had expressed the view that these reserves should have been removed from the plan change process. But in light of this information, the wording that's being drafted now would simply remove these particular reserves from the wider plan change. There may be some implications for Tamaki Regeneration Company in terms of getting on and doing the development. We probably don't have the details on what that might be. If they were to carry out the consultation that's being recommended on the wider open space network plan and conclude that, then we could come back to committee and recommend a standalone plan change just for these 3 reserves. That's not our preferred approach as officers. We do prefer to group all of the reserve rezonings into a single plan change. Otherwise, we'll be doing plan change after plan change and after plan change with lots of cost and process. But yeah, it's not completely unworkable.
So I guess I have a question too. I want to understand, are there implications for the regeneration of housing in the Tamaki area? Does Councillor Bartley have any information there? I know the provision of housing is really important, but I also know the provision of housing in a quality built community connected by and to reserves is important. Do you have any information, or do our staff have any information on any possible implications on the regeneration program?
Mr. Chair, the only implication I can see is timing. But, you know, this is just doing it the right way in the community that already has lost trust in Tamaki Regeneration. And a good implication would be that that trust could be rebuilt. So timing is the issue, but that comes down to the council officers and the local board to work out this consultation to happen immediately, which has been delayed for a number of months already. Thank you.
Okay. Tony, do you have anything? You don't have anything from the TRC company on this?
Well, we've been liaising with them, but I agree timing is the issue, and it would probably only be Taniwha Reserve because Maybury is going from residential to open space, so it's becoming a larger park, and Boundary is a sort of a discrete area which would become residential, but it's kind of a standalone area, so it's probably just the Taniwha Reserve that would be the most critical.
questions on this particular amendment, members? Any questions? Councillor Hulse.
Kia ora, thank you. I'm trying to form up my question in my head because I am sympathetic to the issue that's been raised, and I think it is part of a wider loss of trust that has occurred regionally because of the bungled 17A Parks review process that was badly handled, and then we kind of lost the plot in the media with that one. So, you know, it's not surprising that we are having difficulty discussing parcel by parcel, piece by piece, and that the local board is saying that they don't necessarily trust the process because they haven't got an overarching picture of what is the parks, green open space network that is our future aim. So what are we aiming for and what have we got? Because until we absolutely know that and we've got clarity and a negotiated stance on that, it's very hard then to say what are we happy to let go of. And I think that for me is the step that's missing, and we're striking this area after area, board after board. So Mr Chair, I think there's a lot of really good work happening in here, but through no fault of our staff, the local board, nor some members around the council table, we've ended up in a bit of a schmozzle with parks and open space. So I wonder whether there is the ability to have a look at a slightly more integrated solution to this. And it is kind of, you know, you and Richard and me and Alf, because it is planning and it's parks and open space. And I know I've been agitating for quite a while, though. I'm coming to a question, I think. I've been agitating for a while for us to organise a workshop on this, because I've seen this hoving into view for some time and it's kind of come to a head now. So I'm wondering if there is a way that we could, you know, have a bit of an intermediary solution here. And I think what Councillor Bartley is suggesting is good. I'll put on my glasses so I can actually have a look. But I wonder if we could maybe wait a little bit of this work while we have a slightly more joined up approach with our more macro regional approach to parks and open space. I guess that's my question. What will hurt by just having a slightly bigger look?
Mm-hmm. Tony, you've heard the question from Councillor Hulse.
To finalise the network plan would be that's the ideal situation, because it gives a clearer view for the community as to what changes are occurring. My concern was any delays, but I think that would come down to only probably one reserve in terms of delaying any developments.
Mr Chair, can I just respond to that? And I thank you for the answer. I think the completion of the network plan is our critical one. And as I've said, and this is the strange, confusing and sometimes frustrating integration between planning, environment and finance, is we've got financial imperatives that we've applied to Paluku to meet certain sales goals, to put it bluntly. We've got a network plan that will build, once it's completed, that will build trust and will rebuild relationships that have been damaged. And we've got planning imperatives that are required to proceed, or to allow planning processes to proceed, particularly in areas like Tamaki where the pressure's on. So I'm just going to suggest a bit of the bits that we can solve today, I think we should solve, but I think we need to reprioritise the work around that network plan as far as we can.
Okay, thank you.
If I could please add, Mr Chair, this approach that I'm proposing will actually help with these land exchanges and rezoning when they do come up, because then people could see the whole picture. They will see, oh, that's why we're going to swap Taniwha Reserve for this reserve, because we're going to get this in Maybury Reserve. So they'll see the full picture, and that will help so that we don't have opposition every time you put up each piece of land for notification. So it's just doing things in a good way, in a way that is inclusive and coordinated. Thank you.
Members, if I can just signal that from the chair, I've heard the inputs from Councillor Bartley and good inputs from Councillor Hulse. I think I'd like to commend this resolution just to form part of the, if you were willing, Councillor Bartley, part of the main motion, and I think some good arguments have been put here, and I think it's low risk, that could deliver an even better outcome. And we also renew, if there has been some lost confidence, we begin the task of renewing that confidence that this community requires in us. So I thought I'd just let you know that from the chair. You were happy for it to be incorporated, Councillor Bartley?
Yes, Mr. Chair, thank you.
Thank you. Now, I've got a speaking order. Shall I take this part, or are we willing to move? Questions on this particular part? So we're just questions on the D, which is now incorporated. Councillor Hills.
Thank you, Chair. And I'm not wanting to undermine this because I think this is a good process, but just for the fairness on the staff, because I did ask what the local board's views were on this, and I felt a bit confused, but we either need to have better conversation or something, but what's written in their resolutions says they endorse the whole thing and notes that the proposals will achieve higher quality, safer, better connected open spaces. Then you go down and it says, note our strong support for the rezoning of residential land at Taniwha Street, and this will enable us to achieve better outcomes. And it says similar things through there. So I just want, for the record, for the staff, it is quite hard if they're being sent these resolutions and they're not in the meeting. So I think somehow we need to deal with that, because if I was sent those resolutions, which I looked up yesterday, the other day when we talked about the pre-agenda meeting, I felt like, oh, I'm very confident with what the local board says, because on paper that's what it says. So for the discussion around here, it sort of sounded like the staff were ignoring, and I'm not sure who was in the local board meeting, and I'm not trying to undermine Councillor Bartley, but I just want to say on paper, it looks like the board supported exactly what was happening. So we just need to ensure that we get either all the information or, yeah. So granted, what Councillor Bartley said is that they felt potentially they thought this was the only option, but if staff are seeing those resolutions which, you know, say things like strong support and supporting, then I'm not sure what else we can do from there. So either we need to start back at the beginning, or maybe have ensured the local board were here to, yeah. I'm just a bit worried that now we're going sort of opposite of what is said on paper as opposed to maybe what was said in the meeting. That's my only concern. So.
Look, I think, members, the resolutions of the local board still stand. I think the staff have conveyed that the board generally supported, and we've heard the local member articulate possibly they made that decision with a bit of a caveat, and I think we're addressing it. Councillor Bartley's articulated it well. I think it's very reasonable for us to lend support. I will be to the motion. And I don't think this reflects badly on staff or badly on the local board in any way. I think we're just trying to progress something and do it well. Simple as. Councillor Cashmore.
I quite agree, Mr. Chair. I think in this sort of instance, the more you can take the community along with you, the better the outcome is going to be, and probably the shorter the time frame as well. So to getting this work in the right order, it doesn't have to be a massive long piece of consultation, couple of open days, so people understand in the Tamaki area, which has been challenging, quite frankly, and needs to have a good public understanding of what's trying to be achieved here. And I sympathise with Councillor Bartley and the difficulty she faces within her ward with people who are getting moved around and they're not quite understanding what's really going on. And then we had with Ngāti Power the reserves complication at the end of last year, so that also added uncertainty. So I think if Tony and the team could do some work around getting out there, talking in front of the people, getting to understand the big helicopter picture, you might actually find the whole thing goes a whole heap better in the future.
Thank you, Acting Mayor. And Councillor Walker. So we're back to I think we're back to any part of the motions, and it's moved in second. Councillor.
First of all, I'd just like to endorse the comments that Councillor Bartley made. Overwhelming support on my part. Having said that...
Councillor, could you put the mic closer to your mouth?
Sure, I can do that. How's that?
That's good.
Okay. Can other people hear me? All good. Okay, so just beyond Tamaki, because we're talking about changes here that are beyond that area, they go to the whole of the Auckland region. Have these other changes, where it goes to other local board areas and communities, had any form of engagement or consultation around these changes?
So we send a copy of all the changes to all local boards, just to give them a heads up on potentially what was changing. We had more detailed consultation with Maungakiki, Tamaki, and originally we were looking at Puanui as well, so Otara Papatoi, but that's now been pulled out.
Okay, so in respect of that process, has there been any decision making through those local board agendas? Has there been any opportunity for the community to understand, know what's going on?
Not through the vesting of land, but Panuku has worked with local boards and iwi through the 10 lots that they are looking at incorporating into the plan change.
So over and above the Panuku lots, and I'm assuming they're right at the end of the document, it's not obvious to me what's
correct, yeah.
Panuku and what's not, but
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
my guess.
Yeah.
Okay, so around the other lots, I mean, I've had a look through, and there are a number of individual queries that I have, queries that go to consistency. For example, I see an esplanade area in Riverhead that I've got some familiarity with that is having a zoning change to informal recreation, when in other areas, esplanade areas, have got a conservation zoning. So I've got that's one example. There are some issues that I've got around consistency, and it's not obvious to me whether some of these recommendations are actually the best ones.
So in terms of the zoning, we've consulted with parks, we've used the open space zone descriptions and the guidelines which we use through the independent hearings panel to apply the zoning. So you're quite right, in terms of esplanade reserves, there is two approaches throughout the region. Some are zone conservation, where there's significant ecological values, and others are in zoned informal recreation, where they're more open grassland, there's cycleways and walkways, that sort of thing. So it depends on the environmental values associated with the reserve as to whether it gets conservation zoning or informal rec zoning.
Okay. In respect of these esplanade areas where there are issues around climate change, inundation, erosion and so on, I would have thought that conservation would have been a more appropriate zoning than informal recreation. And again, I'm looking particularly at one example, which is page 65, which is Esplanade Reserve in the vicinity of Riverhead Point. So I have a concern, Mr. Chair, that if there was some further engagement along the lines that Councillor Bartley is seeking for other areas, we might have some additional changes, because from the look that I've had across here, there are a few changes that I would suggest communities would want to have some say on, that have got some merit. So I just want to put
Tony,
that to you.
You communicated with the
Chair.
local board, or all the local boards
Yeah,
on this,
we
and
sent-
you got feedback from Rodney, and you got feedback from Tamaki. Was there other feedback?
No, apart from those ones, there's no other feedback. One other local, Franklin supported the changes, but none from any of the other local boards. These are all they've all come from subdivisions to be vested as reserves, so it's a positive change. I think Councillor Walker's debating the ultimate zoning.
Correct.
Yeah. Well, we've run that past parks. We will notify the changes as well, so the community will have the opportunity to question the zoning. But at the end of the day, they're all owned by Auckland Council, and it's going to be one of the 5 open space zones. I think there is the issue is around these esplanade reserves, where a sports field's a sports field, that's fairly straightforward. Esplanade reserves have this twin zoning approach, and that's occurred throughout the region. It's based partly on what was in the legacy plans as well, but we've got some fairly good guidance as to when to apply conservation zoning versus informal reg.
Okay,
so we have regional criteria that allows us to consider what is the most appropriate zoning to apply.
We do, and
so
yeah.
You've run it through that test, stringent, and you've arrived at the particular zoning that's signalled.
Yep, that's correct. The presence of overlays on the land also indicates that if there's significant ecological areas or other forms of overlay, that generally will mean it will be a conservation zone as well.
Okay, thank you.
So I guess I'm just reflecting some disquiet on my part, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
I don't know what information the local boards had, whether they had information around the zoning in adjacent areas, for example. In this particular instance, I'm familiar with this area, and I would suggest that a conservation zoning was more appropriate than informal recreation. So I just wondered, do I need to make a motion to that effect, Mr. Chair? Because I'm quite happy to.
Well, let's go back. We didn't, in this case, we have not heard from the local board, but the local board was communicated with. It's gone through the regional criteria assessment, and there's still the opportunity going forward for the appropriate zoning to be tested. Is that what I'm hearing?
That's correct.
I mean, this one is a win for us, but look, I'll leave it to other councillors when it comes to the vote.
So just a further question then, Mr. Chair. So what is the opportunity for that further testing? And I'm assuming that means possible change. Is that possible?
The plan change process, I think Councillor Darby is referring to. And so adjacent landowners could submit on the proposed zone and suggest an alternative, and that would go to the independent hearing commissioners.
And the adjacent landowner, if that's the council, then we can make a submission ourselves?
We generally don't. John's just got to jump in.
Councillor Walker, through the chair, we have a process in place with any plan change where once the submissions come in from members of the public, we advise the local board of the submissions and again ask the local board if they would like to make their views known to the hearings panel who will consider the submissions. So local boards are generally comfortable with that process. They don't make submissions on plan changes. We engage with them early on before we bring a plan change to you, as you've heard, but they do have that opportunity when the submissions come in to express their views, and we put their views before the decision makers as we're required to under the essentially under the Local Government Auckland Council Act.
Okay, Councillor Casey, please.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for addressing Councillor Bartley's concerns. That's great support. D, I have a question on C and a general question. My question on C is about any idea how many paper roads we've got across the region? Roughly, in terms of hundreds of thousands?
We're talking about thousands, I think.
Thousands,
yeah.
That's what I thought too. Big job, but great. It'd be a great job. We know some paper roads. Every councillor around this table knows some paper roads that have been claimed by other people for use. So look forward to that report, John. My statement is about Panuku Properties Rationalisation Flowchart. So you can't answer the question, Tony, and I don't think anybody in this room can. It's more a general question. We're accused of being kind of a bit, what's the word, weasel-wordy when it comes to disposals and rationalisations. I would never put those two words in a sentence. And I think when I read this report and look at that flow chart, which is in our agenda, it doesn't make sense to the general public. And I wondered if we could look at using words that are more accessible. Do you know exactly what I mean, eh?
My understanding is that's Panuku's chart, and I think...
I don't want us to use those words.
And we can convey that to Panuku.
So when we are dealing with, we haven't got any of those, sorry John. Just to make sure that we use words that people understand and we don't mystify them like that mystifying chart. Is anybody following that? No. Oh, good.
Okay, would you like me to convey to Panuku to reflect on their language and for the language to be clear and language that citizens might use rather than technocrats? How's that? Okay, we'll take a note and I'll communicate that to Panuku. Fair point. Got questions, Councillor Lee and Councillor Cashmore and then Councillor Walker. Councillor Lee. Councillor Lee? Question? No? No, sorry. Councillor Cashmore.
Yes, thanks. Mine's about C also, Tony. To make your life a little bit easier, should it be publicly owned paper roads first? Because the privately owned ones we looked at in the past, and it is an absolute hornet's nest. Auckland Transport tried and ran to the hills on it. I'm not suggesting we don't do the work. I suggest for you to actually get this through in time. Yep. The privately owned paper road stuff might be an absolute nightmare. I wasn't sure what your intention was, Mr. Chair, but I would suggest that would be a good outcome.
I don't think we're going to be examining privately owned titles. The staff would be here until the turn of the century. So. Happy to amend public. We're appropriate. Publicly owned.
Not saying the private work shouldn't be done at some point, but it's not potentially part of this, quite frankly.
And further question, Councillor Walker.
Yeah, I've got a couple of issues. First of all, around C. Thanks, Councillor. First of all, around C, I've just got a concern around the use of the word redundant. My experience is that something that's redundant at one point in time can be often highly valued later, and I just wonder what the context is around that. I'm particularly mindful of issues like climate change, for example, where we're going to see a lot of inundation and so on, and access as we know it is going to change significantly. I mean significantly. Issues around areas of land that could be used for planting trees and so on in cities are going to come into far more prominence, and that is certainly happening overseas, where trees are acknowledged as one of the fundamental things to cool cities in many locations. So I just want to reflect a concern around C.
Can I help you there? I hope Mr. Members don't mind. I'm happy to just take the word redundant out, because that's almost arriving at
it's
something
redundant.
that the officers might say or not say when they report back. If the members are happy, it just tidies it up a little bit.
Yeah, happy with that. The other matter I just want to raise, and again, I'm assuming it's not subject to some decision making on our part, because I'm certainly not comfortable with the Panuku property rationalisation flowchart. Based on the experience that myself and probably some other councillors have had, there are a number of things that I would be adding into that, and I don't propose to speak to that now, Mr. Chair, but I'm sure that it is something that a number of councillors would like to have some feedback on, because there are mistakes being made in that process as we speak. So I just want to put that on the record.
Thank you. The recommendations are moved and seconded, and thank you, Councillor Bartley. That was a good contribution, and we had a good debate there. So.
One query, Mr. Chair. So I'm assuming that this meeting is not endorsing this property rationalisation flowchart. I just want to get that on the record.
No, just as I responded to Councillor Casey, I will communicate with Panuku on that. It's their flowchart, and it's been presented in this report as it needed to be, and I will take it up with Panuku directly.
Having said that, it's our flowchart too, Mr. Chair, because they're serving to us.
Members, it's moved and seconded. People spoken to that? I think we've had fair contribution on that particular item. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. Declare that carried. Tony, thank you.
Thank you.